Hi everybody, I am here from Tech AMT where we do unboxings, reviews, laptops upgrade and their assembly and disassembly. Today, I'm about to spill all the juicy details on the Asus ROG Zephyrus Duo 15 SE gaming laptop. Picture this, a powerhouse of a machine boasting not one, but two displays, dual power adapters, and a plethora of gaming and productivity features. It's like unwrapping a gamer's dream come true. In this video, we're diving deep into its design, construction, features, and performance, leaving no stone unturned. So buckle up, because this is the ultimate gaming laptop experience you've been waiting for. Let's dive right in. Inside the massive box, we have an ROG gaming laptop bag and ROG Delta gaming headset, a 280 watts main power adapter, a 100 watts USB Type-C portable power adapter and ROG Chakram Core, gaming mouse and ROG DC21 webcam, and the ROG Zephyrus Duo 15 SE gaming laptop itself. Now these bundled peripherals vary depending on the region. Okay, so before we dig in deeper, let's break down the specifications real quick, so that we can get that out of the way. For the variant that we have here, we have an AMD Ryzen 9 5900HX processor partnered with an NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3080 GPU with 32 GB of 3200 MHz RAM and 2 Samsung 1TB NVMe SSDs running in RAID 0. In terms of the display, we have a 4K IPS 120Hz 3 milliseconds main display and a trimmed 4K IPS touchscreen secondary display. I'll pop the complete specifications on the screen so that you can check it out. Now let's take a closer look at the ROG Zephyrus Duo 15 SE. We have a lot of things to discuss here because I don't want to leave any information behind, so sit back, relax, and take it all in. Starting with the design and construction here up top, we have two different textures split by this diagonal line. We have a textured pattern and a smooth surface with an ROG logo. We also have a subtle Republic of Gamers logo here on the backside, a couple of speaker grills, one on each side, and a satellite indicator right here at the center. It's so subtle that it blends right into the pattern. Now, flipping it all over at the bottom, we have 6 rubber feet to make this thing stay in place, 2 main ventilations, one on each side with this nice pattern design, 1 ventilation strip here with a Republic of Gamers logo below it, and another 2 speaker grills, one on each corner for the quad speakers, Dolby Atmos surround sound. The chassis is made out of a combination of hard plastic materials and magnesium aluminide for a strong, but relatively thin form factor. It weighs roughly around 2.4 kilograms, and it's just around 20.9 millimeters thin. Now, before we crack the lid open, let's take a look around first and see what we have in terms of input and output ports. Starting here at the back side, we have some ports and 2 axis ventilation on each side. So we have an Ethernet port, a USB 3.2 Gen 2 type of port, and an HDMI 2.0B port. Looking at the left side, we have another axis ventilation here. We have a micro SD card slot, which is awesome for us content creators, the main power port, and a 3.5mm audio combo jack. Flipping it on the other side, we have yet another excess ventilation here, a USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type-C port that also supports power delivery, and DisplayPort 1.4. We also have 2 USB 3.2 Gen 2 type of ports right here. So as you can tell, we have a pretty decent arsenal of IO Swedish gaming laptop, and you don't have to worry about bringing a dongle. Lastly, looking here on the front side, as you can see, this gaming laptop is definitely thin, and we also have a cutout here at the center to allow us to open the lid much easier. Speaking of opening the lid, this laptop has a substantial weight to it, essentially making it stay in place when opening the lid using just one hand. So let's crack this open, shall we? Alright, so upon opening the lid, the first thing that stands out for me is of course the secondary display. So let's talk about it for a minute. The secondary display features a unique hinge that allows you to tilt and raise as you leave the lid open. It is actually quite creepy and awesome at the same time, and for sure it took a lot of design planning and implementation to come up with something innovative like this. The hinge is strong enough to make the secondary display stay in place even when you put pressure on it for the touchscreen functionality. Of course, it goes without saying that you have to keep your hands off the hinge for safety purposes, But it is also nice that we have a warning right here. The field angle is quite limited, though, up to only around 13 degrees, and you might have to use a stand if you want to tilt the display a bit more. I feel like they could have made the hinge a bit more flexible, allowing you to manually tilt the secondary display further upwards, but at the same time I also think that that could cause an issue when you forget to tilt it back before closing the lid. That would be a total disaster, unless they can manage to make a design that even when you tilt it manually it will still tilt down to surface when you close the lid. As for the secondary display panel itself, what we have here is the 3840 by 1100 IPS 60 Hz 25 millisecond variant, so as you can see, resolution wise it is definitely on par with the main display. With a trimmed 4K resolution in terms of color accuracy for a secondary and supplementary display like this, I'm actually impressed that it has a pretty decent 98 sRGB coverage, 73 NTSC 77 Adobe RGB, and 77p3 color gamut. The only thing that bothers me here is the anti-glare finish, that I feel like it's a bit too much, making the display kind of washed out. In terms of brightness levels, it can go as low as this and as bright as this, pretty substantial even in a completely dim environment. It also has a pretty cool boot up animation, as you can see here, that gives this gaming laptop that futuristic vibe. As for its functionality and features, aside from being a regular display panel, it also has a built-in control center here where you can toggle the brightness app navigator link to my Asus keyboard lock, and a bunch of different launchers that you can customize depending on your preference, and of course the settings for the secondary display. Obviously, as a normal display you can drag and drop things here like folders, programs, windows, and the like, and you can take advantage of this display for things like photo and video editing, gaming, and all the apps that supports this supplementary display. The possibilities are endless, and we could talk about all its use case scenarios for hours. But here's a quick glimpse of what's available out of the box. Music. This makes this gaming laptop a highly versatile machine for any kind of task, may it be for productivity, gaming, multimedia consumption, and even for simple web browsing and multitasking. Now, while we're at it, let's talk about the main display. The variant that we have here is the 15.6-inch IPS 4K 3840 by 2160 resolution with a 120 Hz refresh rate and 3 milliseconds response time. Now, unlike the secondary display, this one is not a touchscreen, but it is Pantone validated, so we should expect pretty good color accuracy, and true enough, as it has 100 sRGB coverage, 94 NTSC 98 Adobe RGB, and 93p3 color gamut, and with an IPS panel and 4K resolution. This makes this laptop ideal for photo and video editing, graphics work, and the like, while also being pretty decent for gaming with a 120 Hz refresh rate and 3 milliseconds response time. The display has good viewing angles, vivid saturation, decent contrast levels, details, and sharpness, although I feel like it could have been better if this is OLED for the deeper blacks, but of course that would also significantly bump the price tag even further, so I'm good with this. As for the brightness levels, you can go as low as this and as bright as this. Here's a quick look at both of the space in a pretty dim environment, and as you can tell, the secondary display is significantly washed out compared to the main display. I don't know if there's a reason behind that, but there's that. Moving forward, it also features slim bezels, making good use of available space, and as you can tell, we don't have a built-in webcam since we haven't included dedicated webcam with the ROG GC21. We also have an Rog Zephyrus logo here alongside, I think, a couple of microphones, and like most Asus products, it also features AI noise cancellation. Spinning of good use of space. Rog was able to cram in a 60 keyboard and a trackpad with dedicated mouse buttons on the entire width of this laptop without wasting any space. The keyboard's layout is almost standard with smaller function rows up top, a larger spacebar, and small but dedicated arrow keys right here. The phones are the typical ROG fonts, which is no surprise, and the keys themselves are pretty good with a decent 1.4mm of travel distance and substantial tactile feedback. It also has a perky RGB lighting with different lighting modes and is fairly bright even in a completely dark environment like this. Of course, it is also customizable via the Asus RSYNC app. As for the trackpad, it is equally awesome. Aside from being a normal trackpad, it can also function as a numpad with just a touch if I button. Unfortunately, you cannot use the normal trackpad functionality while you are on the damped mode, which is kind of weird because on Asus ZenBooks, you can use both functionalities at the same time. Now above the trackpad, we have a few shortcuts. We have the Asus Armory shortcut, the on and off switch. For the secondary display, the toggle for the arrow keys to function as navigation keys, and the power button. You will see an icon at the center of the display when you toggle these buttons. Of course, we also have some useful shortcuts here on the function rows that you can toggle by pressing them alongside the FN key. And what's important here is the power mode shortcuts, wherein you can quickly change between silent performance and turbo mode, which we will test in depth later on our performance benchmarks. Alright guys, I think we're halfway there, but before we proceed with our performance benchmarks, let's talk about one of the most important features of the Rog Zephyrus Duo 15 SE in terms of the cooling solution, and this one is actually hidden from side. So underneath the secondary display, there are a couple of 28.5mm high air intake vents that are in fresh cold air into the internal components. The good thing here is that, unlike the intake from the bottom of the chassis, it doesn't go through other warm components before reaching the CPU and the GPU, which significantly increases the thermal headroom. Alright guys, finally, let's move on to our performance benchmarks. I'll pop my benchmarking methodology on the screen so that you can check it out. This is actually important so that you can have an idea of how I came up with my results. I'll mention on each test if I did something different. Now for our benchmarks, I actually had to test the Rog Zephyrus Duo 15 SE at least 3 times for normal applications and 27 times for each game. 3 different resolutions, 3 different power modes, and average of 3 runs. So please bear with me if this review took longer than expected and this video longer than normal. But yeah, let's get into it. Let's start with the AMD Ryzen 9 5900HX. Here are the Cinebench R15 and R20 scores. And as you can tell, there is a significant difference in terms of performance for each power mode. I'll explain it more later. But yeah, these power modes actually do make a difference, not just some fancy toggles on the software. And now here's the score in Geekbench 5.4. The AMD Ryzen 9 5900HX, its integrated graphics, and the discrete RTX 3080 graphics in different APIS and Blender. I tested this laptop for both Blender's built-in BMW benchmark and an actual render image using the latest Blender version 2.91 using the Red Autumn Forest demo file. Now cupping off our synthetic benchmarks, we have our 3D mark benchmarks for Firestrike Ultra Time Spy and Time Spike Stream, so that you can have an idea of how the Rog Zephyrus Duo 15 SE performs in this popular and reputable benchmark, so that you can compare it with yours. Now moving on to our real-world performance testings in Adobe Premiere Pro with our standard 4K timeline, which is a 13.92-minute project. I was able to export our video using our standard 4K preset for just around 10 minutes in all of the 3 different power modes, and thanks to the 1TB NVMe SSD and RAID 0. Generating thumbnails and scrubbing through the timeline is quite smooth, even with 4K footages. So yeah, you can definitely reliably edit 4K videos on this laptop. Not to mention it has a secondary display where you can place your timeline for more real estate for your clips and whatnot. Spinning of NVMe SSD RAID, what we have here is 2 Samsung 1TB NVMe SSDs running in RAID 0. And as you can tell, the read and write speeds are blazingly fast with 107 megabytes per second sequential read and 20 megabytes per second sequential write. This essentially means that the boot up sequence is just a few seconds, and opening applications and games should take just a couple of breaths. Alright guys, moving on to our gaming benchmarks. Like I said, I had to test the Asus Rog Zephyrus Duo 15 SE 27 times for each game. 3 different resolutions, 3 different power modes, and an average of 3 runs, so that you can have an idea of what you should expect in terms of performance, especially in different power modes, because it affects thermals, noise levels, performance, and of course battery life. Alright, so in CSGO right off the bat, I can definitely say that the silent mode holds back the performance quite significantly, and I believe it does that by limiting the clock speeds and fan speeds in order to maintain a certain noise level. I'll give you a quick sound test later, but definitely if you're gaming, it goes without saying that should only choose either the performance mode or the no-holds-barred turbo mode. As for the actual performance in CSGO, the Asus Rog Zephyrus Duo 15 SE can easily handle it up to 4K resolution and height to very high settings, and will certainly take advantage of its 120Hz display now, and while run pretty much the same thing, you can game on this laptop up to 4K resolution at maximum settings. The same goes in Rainbow Six Siege. It can still reach up to 120 frames per second for that 120Hz refresh rate even at 4K resolution and in ultra settings. To be honest, this is actually to be expected given the powerful hardware inside, especially with an AMD Ryzen 5 5900X price. or in an RTX 3080 graphics. Moving on to our last game, which is Cyberpunk 2077. I had to test this game a whopping 42 times because I wanted to test this with ray tracing and what I believe is the sweet spot settings. Alright, so let's start with ray tracing medium with the LSS quality, because to be honest it's kind of hard to run this game with RTX without the LSS even on a desktop, so yeah. And as you can see, the Asus Rog Zephyrus Duo 15 SE can run this game with ray tracing in 1080p or even at 1440p, but struggles really hard in 4K resolution. Now, I wanted to test if you can play at 4K resolution if we disable ray tracing, but apparently even with the LSS quality at ultra settings, it's still barely playable at around 30 frames per second, and after several further testings, I feel like the best balance settings in terms of visual quality and decent performance at 4K resolution is medium settings with the LSS quality, and of course RTX disabled. With this, we still have the crispiness of the 4K resolution, albeit with the aid of the LSS, with a decent image quality of medium settings with decent frame rates of around 60 frames per second. Now with our test results and comparing both the performance mode and the turbo mode, I honestly feel like you can get away with just the performance mode for a good balance in terms of performance, noise levels, and power consumption, especially if you want to be more discreet and if you want to game on the go. Otherwise, if you game while your laptop is plugged in and you don't care about noise, let's say you use a headset, then by any means go turbo. Now, one thing that I personally like about the design of this laptop in terms of gaming and overall use is the placement of the keyboard, which as you can tell is away from most of the heat sources, and as per my experience you'll barely feel the heat from this laptop at all. Alright guys, moving on to the final stretch of our benchmarks, let's talk about thermals, power draw, and battery life. Here are the thermals for Cinebench are 15 and are 20, so that you can have an idea of how the cooling solution of the Asus Rog Zephyrus Duo 15 SE handled the AMD Ryzen 5 5900HX. As you can see, the temperatures definitely spike hard at max, but if you look at the average stamps for the duration of our benchmark, it is still pretty decent for the most part, except in turbo mode in City Bench. Our 20 again turbo mode is I think the no holds bar setting, giving you the most performance regardless of noise. Now looking at our real world application while exporting our standard 4K video in Adobe Premiere Pro, the attempts for the AMD Ryzen 5 5900HX does spike up to 83 degrees, but is well maintained for the duration of our export process with an average temperature of around 65 to 74 degrees, which in my opinion is pretty decent for this task. Of course, our graphics also do their part for the export process, so here are their thermals. As for the thermal performance while gaming, I'd say this point will manage for all our games, and this is with a turbo setting. Now when it comes to power consumption, we have two options in terms of delivering juice to this laptop. One is via the massive and heavy 280 watts power adapter, and the other one is via the lightweight and compact 100W USB Type-C power adapter. And now here's how they differ in terms of idle power draw. For our three different power modes, turbo mode is not available using the 100 watts USB Type-C power adapter, and when you plug in the 280 watts power adapter, the power mode will automatically switch to turbo mode. And now here's how the Asus Rog Zephyrus Duo 15 SE drops power during load while playing Cyberpunk 2077. Essentially, the 100 watts power adapter runs at performance mode while the 280 watts power adapter runs at turbo mode. And last, but not the least, in terms of battery life, using the PC Mark 10 battery life benchmark for various use case scenarios, the Asus Receptors Duo 15 SE was able to last around 3.55 hours in modern office, which essentially simulates productivity in writing, web browsing, and video conferencing. It was able to last around 3.48 hours in the HD video loop test and 1.35 hours in the gaming test. Now for good measure, I also did my own video loop test playing YouTube videos until the battery runs out. It was able to last around the same duration of 3.4 hours. Take note that this is in the worst possible scenario with maximum screen brightness, maximum volume, and with dual display turned on, so essentially dialing the settings down will yield a longer battery life. Charging the battery using the 280 watts power adapter took only around 1.33 hours. Alright guys, I think that's pretty much it for my review of the Asus Rog Zephyrus Duo 15 SE, and hopefully you get something useful out of this review, especially if you're looking to purchase this quite expensive gaming laptop. This particular variant that we have here is priced around $32,763 AED from Amazon and $17,999 AED from the Shuruf DG store, which is absolutely insane, but for the right person with the right use case scenarios and budget. I still think this gaming laptop is a good all-around mobile device that can pretty much replace a desktop PC. It is versatile, portable, powerful, and highly capable in terms of performance, noise levels, battery life, and without much compromise and drawbacks. Aside from the steep price tag, this is definitely not for everyone. But again, for the right target market space, it brings a lot to the table. There you have it, guys. Huge thanks to Asus for this opportunity to experience something awesome like this. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe if you like it, and see you next time. Have a great day, guys. You're awesome.